Turn to John chapter 9. John chapter 9, and we're going to talk again. Now, last week we talked about Jesus healing the blind man and how the blind man reacted and everything. Well, tonight what I want to talk about is this blind man again, but you see the Pharisees, the people who were out to get Jesus, they heard that this man had received his sight, and so naturally they wanted to stop anything that might be getting started by Jesus. They didn't like Jesus, they were opposed to him, they did everything they could to destroy him, and they knew that if word got out that this happened without some other explanation, then they were going to be in trouble. And so they found this blind man, and they called him in, and they questioned him, and they were trying to explain away the miracle that Christ had worked. Now you remember that Christ, when he was entering the gates of the temple, there was a blind man sitting there. He had been blind from birth, and Christ knelt down and he spat on the ground and made some mud with the spit and the dust there and put it on the man's eyes and told the man, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam." So the man did as he was told, and when he washed his eyes, he could see. Well, so the Pharisees now have found this man, and they've called him in because he's out there telling everybody about how he can see now. Isn't that the way it's supposed to be when God heals us, when God gives us spiritual sight or physical sight or whatever it is that God does? We want to tell people. We want to let people know what God's done in our life. But you know what? When these Pharisees got in there, and we're going to talk about it today, they did everything they could to explain this stuff away. But when they couldn't, when they were finally backed into a corner, when they finally realized there was nothing they could do, that the arguments presented to them they couldn't refute, then they, I guess, just resorted to the last thing that unrepentant people can resort to, and that is just not listening anymore. You know what? You ever been in an argument with somebody and you knew you got the upper hand in making your case, and they just said, "I just don't want to talk about it anymore," and they walked off? You know what? When they do that, you know you got them. I have shared before a story. I like telling this story because it makes me sound smart, and that makes me feel good. But anyway, I like telling this story about when I was at Mercer University, and I was in this class my senior year. In fact, it was my last semester there. And the professor had walked in, very, very likable man. I did like him. We disagreed theologically. He was very liberal and I'm very conservative. But anyway, he walked into that class that day and he said, "Class, I'm going to tell you something today that might shock you." And I thought, no, I've been here for 4 years. Nothing's going to shock me. But I was wrong. He said, Jesus Christ did not come to earth to save people. Well, when he said that, I couldn't believe it. And so the first thing that happened was my hand went up. And he, I think, knew that my hand was going to go up because we knew each other well by then. And he said, "Yes, Eddie." And I said, "Well, could you please share with us what he came to do?" And he said, "Well, he came to teach us to have compassion." And of course, I'm turning in my Bible. And I'm turning over to Luke. And you know, so I raised my hand again, and he said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, I understand that he was compassionate, most compassionate person that ever lived, and we're supposed to try to be like Christ, and therefore we ought to be compassionate. I understand that." But I said, "But right here in the Gospel of Luke," now this is red letter, doctor. I said, that means Jesus is saying this. He says, "For the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost." Now, how do you explain the words of Jesus as opposed to what you just said? And he looked at me and said, "We're not going to talk about it anymore." And you know what? I let it go. You know why? Because I knew I had it. He couldn't explain it. He couldn't explain the words of Christ. And so he had lost the argument, and the only way to get out of it was to just say, "We're not going to talk about it anymore." And that's basically what these Pharisees did with this blind man. Now I want to set the stage for you here before we get into it too much. The Pharisees were educated people. They were the smart people of the day. They were the rulers in the nation of Israel. This blind man had never had an education. He had never had any experience working because he'd been blind all his life. All he knew how to do was beg. He was on the lowest rung of society, so to speak, but yet he was in there presenting an argument to the smart people that they could not defend. And I think it's great that God uses the simple to confound the wise. That gives me hope. That ought to give all of us hope. But let's read together just one verse. Verse 34 in John chapter 9 says this, "And they answered and said unto him, Thou wast altogether born in sins, and dost thou teach us? And they cast him out." Now this is the blind man. This is the man that they pulled in to question, and when they started questioning him, he started arguing for Christ. They didn't want to hear it, and finally, when they realized they couldn't win, they said, "You are a sinner, you were born in sin, and you're in here trying to teach us, and you've never had a day of education in your life." And they excommunicated the man. They kicked him out of the temple. Let me ask you a question. Is it a bad thing to be excommunicated? I guess it depends on what you're being excommunicated from. Because you see, I don't think it's such a bad idea in some cases, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But first of all, let's talk about the attempts of these people. You know, they were trying to avoid the miracle here. They were trying to avoid the claims of Christ that he was the Son of God. And so they made some attempts. First thing they did was they called this blind man in under the auspices of uncovering the truth about what really happened. Now here's the thing. Over the years, there have been some scholars, I won't say Christians, but scholars, who have tried to explain away the miracles that we read about in the Bible. The Red Sea. You know, Moses stood, parted the Red Sea with God's help. The children of Israel went across on dry ground. They got to the other side. Pharaoh's army is chasing after them. And what did Moses do? Moses closed up his arms. The waters came back in and killed Pharaoh's army. Drowned them in the Red Sea. And people have tried to say, well, that's really not the case. They see, it wasn't really a sea full of water. It was a sea of reeds. And I'm thinking, well, that's pretty cool. God allowed them to drown when there wasn't any water around, if it was just a sea of reeds. People have tried to explain away the resurrection. Well, somebody came and took the body. It's buried somewhere else. But he didn't literally come out of the grave. Folks, let me tell you something. If Christ didn't literally come out of the grave, you and I have no hope. But you know what? He did, and we do, and thank God for it. People try to explain the miracles. See, they were being rationalists. They're trying to find some way to explain away the miracle. They tried to take the supernatural aspect out of it, but they only discredited themselves. They made themselves look like fools. But then they tried to separate the miracle from Jesus. They finally said, okay, well, you know, okay, it was a miracle. You received your sight. That's okay. But you ought to give God the glory, because we know that this man over here that you say did it is a sinner. We know Christ is a sinner. You give God glory for receiving your sight, but he didn't have anything to do with it. They tried to separate Christ from the miracle. They had to finally accept the miracle. They had to accept the fact that the man could now see. But they were trying to deny that Jesus was responsible for it. And they said, give God the glory, but don't talk to us about this man because we know he's a sinner. But let me tell you something. God can't be separated from Christ because they are one. And you know what? Christ can't be separated from God or the miracles that God performs. And they didn't realize that. But they tried to, first of all, explain it away. But then when they couldn't explain it away, they tried to separate Christ from it. But then, when they couldn't separate Christ from it, they said, well, you believe what you want to about that man, but we've got the law. Let's fall back on our traditions. There again, are traditions bad? Some of them are very good, and I like some traditions, but let me tell you something. When traditions become the central focus of worship, they're wrong. And we ought to give them up and worship God. They couldn't explain away the miracle. They couldn't separate Christ from us. They said, but we've got the law. Just don't bother us. We've got the law. You see, the blind man reminded them that the law even encouraged belief in Jesus. And when he said that, they said, who are you? You know what? Who are you? They said, you were born in sin, and you're coming in here trying to teach us the law? Get out of here. And they kicked him out, and they excommunicated him, and they refused to listen. You know what? We start talking to somebody about Christ, and they don't want to hear it. They'll try to make excuses at first, but then when you refute every one of their excuses, finally they'll say, I just don't want to talk about it anymore. And they'll leave. They'll refuse to listen. That's the last resort of the unrepentant, is to just not listen anymore. But what was this testimony about? It was the blind man who Christ had healed, who was in there testifying to them. He was testifying and telling them exactly what happened and telling them who did it. You know, we have testimony. How Christ saved us. What brought us to the point of Christ, to where we could accept Him and be saved. And it's been like that ever since Christ came. He said, I am sending you into the world to tell others. That's how new Christians are made. Christians telling other people. I read a story one time about a soldier that fought in World War I. It's been quite some time ago. And he was saved while he was in the military. The chaplain in his unit got to talking to him. He accepted Christ. And it was at the end of the war, and this young man's time was coming to go back home to America. And he was talking to the chaplain one day, and he said, I am so afraid that when I get back home and get with the old crowd, that I'm going to fall back into the same way of life that I was in then, and I don't want to. And so that chaplain very wisely told him, said, when you get home, you testify to what Christ has done in your life to those people, and they'll fall away from you. And the story went that the young man got home, and he saw a young lady that he had known before he left to go to the war, and she was all excited to see him and glad he was home. And he told her about having Christ come in and cleanse his heart, and she turned around and walked off. Not long after that, he saw a couple of his friends that he had been friends with before the war, and he told them about Christ, and they fell away. You see, that's what happens when people don't want to hear about Christ. They just turn away. Let me tell you something. If you testify of Christ, wherever you are, at your job, wherever, you might not be popular. I know you won't be popular with the world if you confess and testify of Jesus Christ. You won't be. You see, you will be excommunicated like this man. But where will you be excommunicated to? I mean, stop and think about it. They were kicking him out of the synagogue, out of the temple. They were excommunicating him. But where were they sending him? And there again, is it a bad thing to be excommunicated? Well, you've heard the story of Martin Luther, who was an Augustinian monk in the Church of Rome. And then one day while reading Scripture, he realized, hey, for by grace are you saved through faith, not that of yourself. And he said, why in the world am I doing this penance all the time when God's already paid the price? And he said, I have questions. And so they kicked him out of the Catholic Church. And thank God for it. Because now we have Protestant churches like the one we're in. We have the faith as we know it. That's based on the Word of God, not on the word of a man somewhere. So being excommunicated is not altogether a bad thing. It could be very good. Luther, it was not a bad thing because he was reformed. But where did the blind man go? See, this is, and I'm almost done, but this is the best part of this whole story to me. They kicked him out of the church. They kicked him out of the temple. But where did he go? Look at verse 35. And Jesus heard that they had cast him out. And when he had found him. You see, Jesus found out they had kicked that man out. And Jesus, the first thing he did was went and found him. And then he looked at him and he said, Dost thou believe on the Son of God? And he answered and said, Who is he, Lord, that I might believe on him? This is what I like about this right here. Verse 37 says, And Jesus said unto him, You have both seen him. Stop thinking about that. This is a man that up until just a little while ago had been blind for his whole life. And now Jesus says, Hey, you've seen him. You think that man didn't pick up on that? You think that man didn't understand exactly what Christ was saying? He said this, You have seen the Son of God, and it's me. Oh, man. Verse 38. Jesus said unto him, let's go back to verse 37. Jesus said unto him, Thou hast both seen him, and it is he that talketh with thee. And he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. Let me tell you something. The Pharisees kicked that man right out of the church and into the arms of Christ. Into the arms of Jesus. Everything that we need, we find in the arms of Jesus. You know, we sing a hymn, Leaning on the Everlasting Arm. Let me tell you something. That's all we need. That's all we need. All we need are the arms of Christ. The arm of flesh will fail you. You dare not trust your own. Leaning on the everlasting arms of Jesus Christ. You see, when Luther got kicked out of the Church of Rome, he got kicked out right into the arms of Christ. When this blind man got kicked out of the synagogue and excommunicated, he got kicked out right into the arms of Christ. Let me tell you something. It's worth it. It's worth it to wind up in the arms of Jesus. Father, I pray. Pray, Heavenly Father, that you would give us strength, courage, and faith. That, Heavenly Father, you would help us not to fear, but to be bold in testifying for you, even though it may cost some things. Lord, may it send us right back into your arms, where we long to be. For it's in your precious and holy name that we pray.